Our collapsing ability to pay attention is not primarily a personal failing on my part, or your part, or your kid's part. This is being done to all of us, and it's being done by very powerful forces. Those forces include big tech, but they also go way beyond them. This is a systemic problem. The truth is that you are living in a system that is pouring acid on your attention every day, and then you're being told to blame yourself and fiddle with your own habits while the world's attention burns.
Oof, this really hit home to me, Johann. Today, when I was preparing to talk to you, I was so excited to talk to you. I think this topic is absolutely deeply fascinating and urgent. I sat down to read some briefing notes that our team had prepared about the book. I listened to you, and yet when I was sitting down to read the notes, it probably took me 3 or 4 goes to get through it, and I was up and doing other things, and what's wrong with me? What's wrong with this?
No, it's so true, Bridget. The reason I wrote the book is because I felt exactly the same thing happening to me. It felt like with each year that passed, things that required deep focus were getting more and more like running up a down escalator. Do you know what I mean? Like I could do it, but it was getting harder and harder. And I could see this was happening to almost everyone around me. And I was particularly worried about the young people in my life, a lot of whom seemed to be whirring at the speed of Snapchat where nothing still or serious could touch them. So I started to look at the facts on this, and they're really shocking. The average office worker now focuses on any one task for only 3 minutes. For every child who was identified as having serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. So to get to the bottom of this, I want to use my training in the social sciences at Cambridge to go on a big journey all over the world. I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus from Moscow to Miami to Melbourne. And I learned from them and from diving very deeply into their science that there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make it worse. And loads of the factors that can make your attention worse have been hugely rising in recent years. So we're in a very serious attention crisis. Professor Barbara Dumeny, who's one of the leading scientists in France, said to me, it's not possible to have a normal brain at the moment. And the key thing to understand is that your attention didn't collapse, right? We keep thinking, I thought, there's something wrong with me. I'm not strong enough. My willpower isn't strong enough. Your attention didn't collapse. Your attention's been stolen from you by a really big range of forces. We've got to understand what those forces are, and they range quite widely. There's some aspects of our tech, it's not all of our tech, but they range from the food we eat, which is ruining our focus, to the sleep we no longer get, to the hours we overwork and exhaust ourselves. But once you understand these factors, we can begin to fight back in 2 ways. And I think of it as defense and offense. We've got to defend ourselves and our kids as individuals as much as we can. And I go through dozens of things everyone can do tomorrow. But I want to be honest with people. At the moment, it's like someone is pouring itching powder over us all day. And then it's like that person is leaning forward and going, do you know what, mate? You might want to learn how to meditate. Then you wouldn't scratch so much. To which the response is, yeah, I'll learn to meditate, but we need to stop you pouring itching powder on me. We need to take collective action to stop these forces doing this to us. And I talk about very practical ways we can do that. And I went to places from France to New Zealand that had begun doing that.
I just want to ask you about, because what you seem to find was that it wasn't necessarily our devices. When you set out to write the book, you thought that it may well just be social media, but it wasn't only our devices that were pulling our attention in 100 different ways. What are some of the other factors in our cultural landscape at the moment, especially after the pandemic, that are stressing us out and are really gnawing away at our attention and our spans?
Well, you mentioned stress, and I think this is a really big and important factor. And the way it was explained to me was by an incredible scientist named Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's now the Surgeon General of California, the senior medical figure in the state. And Dr. Burke-Harris, this was before COVID, but she was explaining how stress destroys attention. She said to me, imagine one day you're walking down the street and you're attacked by a bear out of the blue. In the weeks and months that follow, something will completely involuntarily happen to your attention. You're going to find it harder to read a book, think about paying your mortgage, because a part of your brain will just be scanning for risk and danger. You're like, something came out the blue, so your brain is going, well, what else might come out the blue? Okay, now imagine that a bear attacked you again. then you'd likely flip into a state called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is where you can't focus on things in front of you because you're just so scanning, your brain is just scanning for risk and danger. A wonderful doctor in Adelaide, Dr. John Giordini, said to me, deep focus is a really good strategy when you're safe, right? Read a book, you'll learn, you'll grow. Deep focus is a really dumb strategy if you're in danger. You'd be a fool to sit at Gallipoli reading a novel. You're not going to be around for very long. We evolved to only be able to focus when we feel safe. And I remember at the start of the pandemic, loads of people saying, who were locked in, going, especially, God, you guys had the longest lockdowns anywhere, saying, oh, I'm going to learn French on Duolingo. I'm going to read Tolstoy. And no one read Tolstoy and no one learned French. In fact, people Googling, how do I get my brain to focus, increased 300%.
Never did learn how to sew.
For precisely this reason, right? That it was like the bear attacked us again, and attacked us again, the third wave. So anyone who has struggled to focus in a pandemic, it's not your fault. You're not weak. You're not a failure. And when you look at all these big factors that are invading our attention, the important thing to understand is we didn't choose these things. These have been imposed on us by these big social forces, but we can begin to deal with them. But it requires a shift in psychology. It requires us to understand that this is something that's being done to us, and particularly to our children. The last quarter of the book is about our kids, how we can, because the crisis in children's attention is particularly horrendous, and what we can do about that.
Daniel, you've got a book deadline, I know, this year. How's your attention? How's your focus? And a lot of the things that Johann's saying ringing true for you?
Well, when I found out I was coming on the show this evening, I first thought that it was the world's most elaborate intervention.
We've brought Johann in here to work one-on-one with you.
Next level, absolute next level. Because the pandemic, I think, for a lot of us has highlighted the fact that we're actually living with these devices, and these devices are actually, in many ways, controlling how we actually interact with the world. In your book, Johann, you say that in a 24-hour period, people touch their phone 2,617 times. I disagree with that because some people never let their phone go. And so I learnt to play the guitar when I was 14, and it was something I was very, very passionate about, something I was very, very focused on. And it's something actually I'm very proud of because I became quite good at it. But if there was a 14-year-old Daniel now looking to really apply themselves to become good on an instrument, I think I would struggle really, really hard to be able to focus and pay the attention to detail required to learn an instrument. So that's why I signed a book deal.
I love the way you put that, Daniel, because it goes to the heart of one of the key reasons why attention is so important, which is, I would just say to anyone watching, think about anything you've ever done in your life that you're proud of, whether it's Rebecca's amazing work in business, whether it's you learning to play the guitar, whether it's being a good parent, whatever it might be. That thing that you're proud of doing required a huge amount of attention and focus. And when attention and focus break down, and there's good evidence they're breaking down, your ability to achieve your goals and your ability to solve your problems breaks down. This is why when you feel chronically distracted, as I did before I started working on this book, in a way, it feels almost like you become a kind of stump of yourself, right? You can sense what you might have been, but you feel like you can't get there, which is why it's so important for us to grapple with these deeper causes.
Rebecca, what's this doing to our passions, as Johann says, the things that we really love doing, our relationships, our work life?
Well, there are, as everyone said, there are so many distractions that pull us away from those things that really matter. Maybe, for some of us at least, one of the things that was a positive, in a way, about being locked down is that it made us slow down. And one of the things that Johann talks about is making time to slow down. So many of us got to know our neighbourhoods really well because we were only allowed to walk around a very small amount of space. And although in some ways you might say, oh, that's pretty boring, actually, no matter how small the neighbourhood is, you start seeing things. And one of the things that I love about living where I do in the Blue Mountains is just walking in my garden every day and finding something that I didn't see the day before. And so that ability to slow down is something that we got out of the pandemic and I hope we don't lose. But one of the other things that I'd be interested in Johann talking a bit more about is the effect that it has on the way that we work, because there's, you know, this idea that in a workplace we are constantly interrupted. And even there's a guy in New Zealand who's come up with this new way of working so that you work 4 days a week instead of 5.
Yep.
People get paid the same amount and they are more productive. One little thing they did was to make a rule which says you don't eat at your desk. Because if you're sitting in an open plan office and someone's eating next to you, your attention is inevitably going to be taken onto the tuna sandwich or whatever. So the rule they made is no eating at your desk, you have to go to the canteen.
Yeah. Johann, how important would a 4-day week be for...
So I spent, I spent a load of time with Andrew. So sorry, Bridget, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I spent a load of time with that company. You're exactly right.
So
Andrew Barnes, Petrol Guardian. I think you're totally right. There's a few things about work. I'll come to the 4-day week in a second, but Rebecca, you asked about work particularly. And there's one particular aspect, one of the 12 causes that are destroying our attention that I write about in Style and Focus, that I think really speaks to this. There's lots of things that are relevant to work, but one of them is, I went to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, a guy named Professor Earl Miller. And he explained to me, he said, look, there's one thing about the human brain you need to understand more than anything else. You can only consciously think about 1 or 2 things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. Hasn't changed in 40,000 years. It's not going to change anytime soon. But what's happened is we've fallen for a mass delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 7 forms of media at the same time. So what happens when scientists get people into labs and get them to think they're doing lots of things at the same time is what they discover you can't. In fact, you're always juggling very quickly. You're going, what was that on WhatsApp? What did he just say on Facebook? What did she just ask me? Wait, what was that? What's on the TV over there? You're juggling. And it turns out that comes with a huge cost. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. When you try and do more than one thing at the same time, you will do all the things you're trying to do much less competently. You'll make more mistakes. You'll remember less of what you do. You'll be less creative. It feels like a small effect. It's really big. In one experiment, they found that just receiving 8 text messages an hour, doesn't feel like very much, lowers your brain power by 30%. We are all losing this brain power. If you're interrupted by something as small as a text message, it takes on average 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus you had before you got that message. But most of us are never getting those 23 minutes spare. This leads to exhaustion. One of the things that the 4-day week in New Zealand was so important about was that workers were just absolutely knackered. We don't sleep. We're constantly plugged in. We're constantly worried that our boss is going to message us, which is why we have to have, I think, a range of strategies. So a lot of them are personal. You can't see this, but behind my laptop, I have something called a K-safe. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial at the top, and it will lock your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. I won't sit down with my partner and watch a film unless we imprison our phones. I won't have dinner with my friends. I couldn't have written my book if I didn't imprison my phone. That's a personal thing. But we've also got to take on and regulate the big forces that are doing this to us. And there's a really interesting analogy in Australian history, I think, that can help us to think about this. So you guys will all remember, I can remember it from my childhood, because we're all the same age or older, I think, that it used to be normal that we put leaded petrol in our cars, right? And then it was discovered, it was actually known about for quite a long time, that exposure to lead really damages people's brains, and in particular damages children's brains. So by the 70s, that science was really clear. So ordinary mothers in Australia banded together and said, why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing the lead industry to damage our kids' brains? So what they did, it's very important to notice what they didn't do. They didn't say, let's ban all petrol, right? They said, let's ban the component in the petrol that's damaging people's attention. They succeeded. We don't use leaded petrol anymore. Now, there are specific aspects of social media that are explicitly designed to invade, hack, and raid our attention. It's not the whole of social media. There are specific aspects, and there are specific ways we can fix that I learned about in Silicon Valley by interviewing the people who designed the things that have hijacked our kids and hijacked so many of us. It's the equivalent of banning the lead in the lead paint. But these companies won't do that of their own accord any more than the lead industry was one day going to go, you know what, guys, I think we've made enough money. Let's just stop doing this. I argue in the book, Stolen Focus, that just like we needed a feminist and still need a feminist movement to reclaim women's bodies and their lives, I think we need an attention movement to reclaim our minds, to take on the whole broad range of these 12 factors that are invading our attention. But it requires a shift in consciousness. We need to stop blaming ourselves primarily, and we need to realize we are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from his table.
Yeah.
We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and we don't have to tolerate our minds, and in particular our kids' minds, being hacked and invaded this way. It doesn't have to happen. We can reclaim our minds, but we've got to understand why this is happening to us, and we've got to start fighting back.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of the time. We've got a bit of time,
sorry.
only a little bit of time left, but maybe Dan and Rebecca, very quickly, what are some things you're going to do this year to reclaim your time? Dan, I might go to Dan.
Yeah, go.
Well, if I'm able to finish this book, then that will speak for itself. One thing I like to do on a daily basis is more or less cook. That's the time of the day where I can actually take time to be mindful, put on a bit of music and take my time in actually preparing hopefully what will be a delicious meal. Yeah. And that's where I've got my sort of centeredness from throughout the pandemic. So I'm going to continue to cook, I'm going to continue to write, and I'm going to continue to listen to vinyl records because you have to flip those.
Yeah, and you've got to put your phone in the box. Becca, just before we run out of time, one
so
thing from you.
I think one of the things I want to do is actually, I suppose, tell some of the messages that Johann's focused on in the circles that I move in, because each of us, whether we're parents or employers or employees, we've all got a role to play, and I think that's what I want to do.